Light a campfire, and everyone's a storyteller. Join us for some thought-provoking and beyond fireside chats.
Hello and welcome to Leave Our World a Better Place. My name is Kasia and today I'll be speaking to Archie Voorspuy, General Manager of the Suyian Conservancy. Archie will be speaking to us about this exceptional wildlife area in central Kenya with its diverse landscapes and rare and endangered wildlife species. Archie, thanks so much for being here with us today to chat about the Suyian Conservancy, this beautiful spot in Kenya, and about what you do there and what makes the place so special.
Yeah, well, I'm very happy to be here. Very excited for our partnership going forward with and beyond. It's exciting times. But yeah, so Suyian is a pretty special corner of Laikipia. So if you look at a map of Kenya, we're sort of pretty much a little bit left of the middle of Kenya. It's sort of to the east, we've got Mount Kenya, and then to the south, we've got the Aberdares. So it's a beautiful scenery area. And obviously there's plenty of wildlife around. But yeah, no, very much looking forward to moving forward with and beyond.
Fantastic. We're really looking forward to hearing more about it, and I think to exposing our listeners to a lot more about this wonderful part of Kenya that I think a lot of them might not know about. Before we go into the details around Suyian, could we just start off a little bit? Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be working at the Suyian Conservancy and what your role is there?
So I started on Suyian in January 2016. So what's that? That's sort of 7 years ago. And I grew up in Kenya. My family were involved with tourism, doing horseback safaris in the Masai Mara. When I left school, I fell into the family business for a little bit, and then decided that guiding wasn't for me as such, and ended up coming to work for the Poas family who owned Suyian. And worked with Guilford, who was the owner for 2 years, and then he passed away. And then when he passed away, I sort of slipped into the general manager role, and sort of been here ever since. But you know, it was quite an easy trade-off from tourism, coming to live in the bush anyway. Sort of conservation, wildlife, and such has sort of been part of my life since I was very small.
You've mentioned that Suyian is part of the Laikipia region, which is more or less central Kenya. Can you just I think you did set the scene on more or less where it's located. Can you just talk little bit about Laikipia and what it is in your view that makes it such a special place?
Yeah, so it's a very special, unique part of the world. It's basically a big mixture of land. Here you have sort of private conservancies, private cattle ranching, community land, and it's sort of very sparsely populated compared to other parts of Kenya. But, you know, the whole area is about 90% unfenced. You know, we don't have a single fence on Suyian at all. So the wildlife can roam from here to Samburu, to Lewa, to Barana, to Old Pejeta. So there's a pretty unique landscape in that regard. Most of the time, the wildlife is sort of on Suyian, but as I said, there are these migration paths, natural migrations, you know, following the rain around as much as possible. So it's a pretty unique place in that regard. But you know, we've got two main rivers flowing through Laikipia, which are sort of the lifelines of the area. So water, there's plenty of water. We have pretty good rainfalls here generally. We've just been through quite a tough drought, but we've come out the other side of that. So it's a pretty amazing wildlife haven and a big connected landscape, which is pretty unique for Kenya and if not Africa.
I really think that whole concept of an unfenced wildlife area is something that's very unique. And you know, I'm sure it's got its own challenges, but also, you know, pros and cons. So as you've spoken about the wildlife corridor, which is really amazing that wildlife can follow the natural patterns. But, you know, in terms of the balance, you also said, does it make it a little bit more difficult to predict where the wildlife is going to be? Or is there pretty much a set rainfall pattern that it tends to follow? You know, obviously barring the drought years. Yeah,
no, for sure. It's, you know, there's always the resident wildlife. You know, you've got your territorial wildlife, you know, your big cats, wild dog. You know, they all seem to stay pretty much within their territory. So we've got the resident wildlife here as well. And then, you know, the sort of plains game and the elephants are the ones that sort of fluctuate in numbers a bit. You know, there's always elephants here, but, you know, it's, you know, sometimes there can be less than others. And in other times, you know, we can have hundreds of them everywhere. So, it's not so much that the wildlife all disappears at certain times a year, it's always here. So, we're sort of quite lucky in that sort of sense. Then also with that, with the elephants, we sort of have the big old resident bull herds that hang around here. Being 44,000 acres, we generally have good grazing, good areas for them. So there's always something going on here.
Absolutely. And the fact that you've got so much river frontage, I'm sure must also be a plus for the wildlife.
Yeah, hugely. We've also got quite a few dams and reservoirs and things like that, which we've put in to sort of help through the drier periods. But as long as you've got enough vegetation and water, the elephants seem to do pretty well and enjoy being in this part of the world.
Now, Archie, obviously, Laikipia is nowhere near as well known as some of the other wildlife areas in Eastern Africa and Kenya particularly. It doesn't have the fame or the renown of the Masai Mara. But again, that's something that whether it's justified or not. In your opinion, how does Laikipia compare to those popular reserves such as the Mara, both in terms of, game viewing opportunities, game density, and also the experience itself? What game viewing is like, what the landscapes are like, what the sense of space is like?
Yeah, so it's pretty similar to the places like the Mara in sense of space and open country. We've got, as I mentioned earlier, we've got the two mountains in our view shed. Most places in Laikipia, you can see the top of Mount Kenya and the top of the Aberdares from everywhere. So, you've got these huge views. Kenya's about 100 kilometers away from us. And, for 200 mornings of the year, it stands there clear and proud and we can see it beautifully. So you've got these huge vistas, which is great. Then also you've got a lot of diversity. We've got a lot of rock copies, especially on Suyian. We've got a beautiful line of granite that actually runs down below where the lodge is going to go. And that's beautiful to look onto. And then obviously the river frontage is quite a spectacular, unique part of the landscape. Then from a wildlife point of view, we don't have the densities that we have in the Mara. The Mara is sort of pretty unique in that sense, but we have quite a few species that you don't get elsewhere in Kenya. We have the Grevy's zebra, for example, the reticulated giraffe, Jackson's hartebeest. So we sort of get this mixture of unique wildlife in this area. From a wildlife viewing perspective, you're going to have a lot more unique sightings than you probably would in the Mara. But yeah, it's definitely not the same game densities, but there's still plenty of wildlife here, and it's sort of and I would almost say it's a little bit more interesting than the wildlife you get in the Mara. More diverse anyway.
Well, I would imagine that, along with that lower density of game also goes a lower density of tourism. So it must be really exclusive game viewing that's far away from all the crowds as well.
Yeah, 100%. And, there's some conservancies in Laikipia which are open to drive-in tourism, but here, we're sort of, it's very exclusive. So if we have a lion sighting, you're going to be by yourself basically, which is very special.
Absolutely, especially in that East African context, I think.
No, for sure. The exclusivity of it is pretty special. I sometimes have to pinch myself, driving around working and, you stumble across a big pride of lion here called the Nduru Pride, which is currently 15 strong. And it's just you and the 15 lions sitting there. It's quite a unique experience.
Archie, you mentioned the other conservancies in the Laikipia area, and obviously in an unfenced area like that, it's really important for them to be some kind of unified vision about the wildlife and about the use of the land. I believe that the long-term plan for the Laikipia area is to create a larger conservation area that includes a number of neighboring conservancies. Could you talk about that a little bit? To what extent is that already happening, and what are the plans for this and coming up in the future?
We're all basically singing off the same hymn sheet when it comes to sort of land practice and conservation. Traditionally speaking, this has always been a intensive ranching part of Kenya. Basically, from the late 90s, moving into the early 2000s, everybody sort of changed tact a bit, and we'll touch on the cattle operation slightly a bit later. But this whole landscape has been managed with conservation in mind, despite being livestock operations as well. So we all have very good relationships with our neighbors already, and maybe in the future we'll could look at a bit more collaboration at the landscape level, working even closer together. We go down the route of sort of, instead of having sort of hard boundaries, allow a bit of intertraversing across the different properties to sort of give that even greater sense of space. But there's, especially from the Conservancy's point of view, there's a sort of very unified vision on conservation as well as operating livestock with conservation in mind. And that's sort of one of the reasons why this landscape is sort of is so healthy environment, is because of the cattle operations and the way they're managed holistically, and those kind of practices have allowed the wildlife populations to really boom in the last few years.
Oh, that's incredible to find some like-minded neighbors that actually manage things the same way. I'm sure that makes all the difference in the world.
No, it sure does.
Okay, Archie, so we've set the scene a little bit, spoken about Laikipia and area looks like and how it feels. Can you tell us a little bit about the Suyian Conservancy in particular? And I understand it's got really, really beautiful and diverse landscapes. And you've already mentioned the koppies and the river frontage. Could you just describe the concession and the landscapes and the variety of them in general?
So we're quite lucky here, especially on this eastern side of Laikipia. We have quite a lot of open country, big rolling plains like you have in Namara. And then as you go down towards the river, you sort of have open acacia woodland. And then we've got this beautiful escarpment that runs parallel to the river, which is sort of, again, comes into sort of more acacia woodland, slightly thicker bush. And then as you get down to the river, then we have all the koppies and everything down in the basin next to the river. So it's extremely diverse, and you could drive 10 minutes and you could be in 3 different parts of Africa very easily. So it's quite unique, and it changes in elevation quite a lot. So up on the top on the plains, I'm afraid I only use feet, so it's sort of about 6,200 feet up at the top. And then you go all the way down to the river, which is sort of 5,300 feet. So it's sort of got 1,000 foot of elevation as you go sort of east to west on the property. So as you can imagine, with that sort of relief as well, with the mountains, we have some pretty stunning views here.
I can imagine. It sounds absolutely amazing. Really exceptional variety, and given the size of the Conservancy, really amazing. Yeah,
no, it's pretty unique. Very lucky.
Okay, so we spoke a little bit about the river and the impact that it has on the wildlife and in terms of bringing the animals into the area. Is that going to have an influence on some of the activities that we're going to be able to offer at Suyian as well?
Yeah, for sure. And, as I said, it's not a national park. So you don't have all the rules and regulations that come with being in a national park. Swimming in the river, jumping off the waterfalls, kayaking in the rivers, walking, horse riding, bicycling, we're not beholden to any national rules on that front. So there's a lot of freedom here, which you don't get in other parts of Kenya and maybe even the world. So from that state, so the rest of Africa rather, maybe not the world, but from that point of view, it's awesome. Fly camping, all those kind of things we can do. And, I think that will really help to create quite a unique guest experience.
Absolutely. It really sounds like an absolute playground of different experiences.
No, 100%. Can't beat it, really.
You've mentioned a little bit about the wildlife. One of the species you mentioned were African wild dogs. And I believe that's one of the exceptional wildlife draw cards for this area in terms of endangered species that you're likely to see at Suyian. Can you tell us a little bit more about the wild dogs and about any other endangered species that you might see, how often you see them, or what are the real highlights of that wildlife experience?
For sure. So we've got a pack of 14 wild dog at the moment in the area. The thing with the wild dog is they have quite a large territory. So when they're coming through, they're passing through, but we definitely see the pack at least once a month in the area. But then also that's because, we don't really have a big tourism footprint on Suyian as such at the moment, sort of transitioning from being a primarily cattle operation into the tourism side of things. So there's not always people looking for them. But, they're always in the area. And as I say, we see them once a month without even looking for them. So if you have people out there looking for them, that would probably come up. That interval between sightings would probably come right down. They're generally always in the area. And then, as I said, we have the Grevy's zebra, which is a sort of northern Kenya variety. It's a lot bigger with a lot thinner stripes. It's a beautiful animal. And we've got the Jackson's hartebeest, which has only plus or minus 700 of them left in Kenya. were in Laikipia. So from that as well, then we've also got a manalistic leopard that's 2 or 3 of them now, which have made Suyian their home. So that's a pretty unique experience as well, having them around. And, it's a pretty amazing sighting when you do see it.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's not something that you ever heard of being spotted anywhere else.
No, when all the lodge architects and everybody were here, they actually pleasure of bumping into it just completely out of the blue, which is quite amazing.
That's always the way wildlife sightings go.
Yeah, when you're least expecting it.
It's the rare stuff as well, and also those the sort of northern Kenyan species that you were talking about that are a little bit different from the rest of the country, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then we have you've got the civils and caracals and all those kind of things as well. So we sort of we have everything here basically apart from black rhino, which is definitely it's in the pipeline, and we're sort of having conversations about going down that route. But that's for the future.
And also, of course, Laikipia is also known for its elephant. I think it's the second largest population of elephants in Kenya. Does this apply equally to the Suyian Conservancy? And do you get really large numbers of elephant as well?
Yeah, for sure. Again, it can be slightly seasonal, but as I said, we always have elephant here. It's just the sort of number of elephant that varies, and they're pretty free to roam. They sort of don't have the ranges that they used to migrate in, but they're pretty free to roam. So the numbers do fluctuate, but it is there. We definitely have a very healthy population of elephants here, which is always good to see, and it's quite a good litmus test for the health of the environment in this part of the world. So it's always nice to have them around.
Amazing. It certainly sounds like there's no shortage of interesting things to see.
No, there's certainly no shortage of that.
Archie, I'd like to just chat a little bit about, how the Conservancy itself works. You mentioned previously that there were cattle on the land as well, and that it's actually a model that's quite common in the area. But I think it might very well be something that not that many of our listeners are familiar with, because it's not really something that's practiced a lot in other parts of Africa. Could you just talk a little bit and describe how the cattle ranching works side by side with the wildlife, what the benefits are for the ecosystem and how all of that interacts with each other?
Yeah, so historically, Suyian's always been a cattle operation. It was actually a sheep operation right at the beginning. They had 9,000 head of merinos here. And then obviously when the polyester fleece was invented and the price of wool came down, the families moved more to a cattle-based operation. And, so as I was saying, the Conservancy is 44,000 acres. But what we basically practice holistic grazing management system here, which basically means we have all the cattle in 10% of the property at any one time, no more than that. And they're all bunched together in a high density grazing system. So what that means is that you have the other 90% is completely free of cattle, and the wildlife is in those areas. Basically have the cattle being so condensed means the footprint of the operation is actually relatively small and at any one time. And then we obviously move the cattle around using, once they've grazed out an area, they move them on, and we move them out of that area onto the next area, then graze the next 10%, and then so on and so on and so on. So there's a big rotation that we have really well that lets the wildlife have a good, the majority of the property to be in. And it's actually interesting when you have a lot of grass, it tends to be the wildlife all come and join the cattle because they prefer the shorter, fresh green grass that the cattle have grazed out behind. And it's slightly ironic how that works. You sort of give the wildlife as much space as they can, but they end up being within the cattle anyway. So the holistic grazing system, is basically the concept of it is to graze an area as intensively as possible and then let it recover for the most amount of time as possible. So you've always got fresh, new, healthy green grass growing up, which the wildlife actually way prefer. So as much as a revenue stream the cattle are, they're actually extremely useful management tool in making sure that the rangeland is healthy and young and sort of productive, rather than having seas of grass, which when it gets sort of tall and hard and woody, and then nothing actually eats it. So they complement each other extremely well, and it's, as you say, it's a pretty unique system. Quite a lot of People, game farms in South Africa would probably be horrified to hear that we have a big cattle operation with the wildlife and vice versa. But it works very well. And as I say, it's been happening for a long time.
The way you describe it actually makes all the sense in the world. And the value of that revenue stream from the cattle is also something that can't be underestimated. I think if there's one thing that COVID taught us, it's that how tenuous it is for Africa's wildlife areas to rely on tourism for an income and for actually being able to fund those areas. So if there's a way that you can combine cattle ranching and wildlife and include a revenue stream in it, I think it's a really fascinating model.
No, for sure. I mean, it kind of places, you need as many revenue streams as possible. Today, conservation is all about sustainability. And if you're not financially stable, something's going slightly wrong somewhere. You can't claim to be in conservation if you can't balance the book. So it's a great two birds with one stone scenario.
In addition to the cattle grazing, I know that you do a lot of active land management at Suyian as well. And I remember hearing that one of the things that was quite a challenge in the area was alien plants encroaching, on the grazing. And I believe that's something that you've managed very well at Suyian. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that and how you've managed to keep it at bay?
Yeah, for sure. So there's a South American cactus called Opuntia, which came in from somewhere. I'm not quite sure where it is. I think it was brought in as an ornamental plant in a garden or something like that. And as such the case, they've had huge problems with that. I think they've had it in South Africa, Australia. But we have basically had to go to manual extraction of the plant. We are also attacking it biologically with cochineal, which is a sort of beetle that actually eats it, but it doesn't eradicate it. Obviously beetle can't eradicate its primary source of food, but it certainly slows down the spread, which is the main thing. But we've got a team full-time walking transects out on the Conservancy, and every single plant that they come across, we pull it out. And then we've got various methods of getting rid of it. One of which is cutting it up and putting it on the roads. And then the cars driving over it, that kills it, dries it out. And then in other places where it's too far away from the road, we pile it up and we actually have to burn it. Otherwise, if you leave it there, it just regenerates and sprouts again. But we've been very lucky at Suyian. We've managed to stay on top of it a lot more so than others. So we're in a lucky situation, but it was sort of a question of nipping it in the bud before it became too big a problem. But we're not going to relax our efforts. We'll keep going round and round and round until it's gone, if we can get it to disappear completely. But I fear it'll be a bit like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. By the time you finish one lap, you have to go back to the beginning.
Yeah, you have to start over.
But it's definitely worth the effort to keep on top of it now while it's still manageable. And we'll keep doing the cochineal, which is the biological method as well, and sort of have a two-pronged attack and sort of hopefully stay on top of it. But it's quite tricky because the baboons, the elephant, all those wildlife, they've started eating it now as well, which is
okay.
Just turbocharging the spread a bit. But I'm sure we'll be able to keep on top of it, especially on Suyian. We sort of nipped it in the bud in 2014, which is actually before I came here, and we've sort of kept on top of it since then. So carry on, keep on going with that.
Well, it certainly sounds as though Suyian is an absolutely magical place with so much to offer. I certainly can't wait for an opportunity to see it. Just, as we sort of round up our chat, I know this is a really impossibly unfair question, but I'd really love to hear, what is one of your favorite wildlife memories or experiences or things that have happened to you during your time at Suyian?
Yeah, this was the question I was dreading a bit because
it's a tough one. I'm sorry.
It is a tough one. You can't really beat those sort of scenarios where just when it's just you in this big pride of lion. I've had a couple of experiences with them. Just driving around doing normal conservation work or cattle work or whatever, and you bump into them lying on the side of the road, and you're just sitting there, and it's just you and 15 lion, and there's nothing else going on around you. But it's a pretty cool pride, and we're getting to know them very well. Their territory, one end is on the edge of one side of Suyian and the other edge is on the other side of Suyian. So it's a very cool pride. But hanging out with them is pretty amazing. And then, the wild dog fascinate me, and it's awesome when they come through. Their whole social structure and what they do is just pretty phenomenal. But yeah, I'm yet to see the black leopard, which is quite. I don't have the luck that most people have for some reason.
Yes. Well, maybe it's saving itself for.
Despite being here for 8 years, but yeah, it'll be quite cool to see that one day. But Anne, who has the little camp on the other side of Suyian, they see it pretty much on a weekly basis. But yeah, no, I'm yet to be blessed with that sighting yet. But it's always good to have something to look forward to.
Absolutely. I think Africa has a way of doing that to you. There's always something that's held back.
Yeah.
I have to ask, do you get involved in like the lion pride and the wild dogs as well? Do you like get involved in following them and watching out for them and seeing what's happened and who's split off and moved off where and how the whole lion soap opera works?
Yeah, we do. As I said, there's no one out monitoring all the time and what have you. But, this pride of lion, there's 4 main females in there, and they've had these 11 cubs that have all now grown up. There were 17, but 3 of the bigger sort of young males have now split off. But when we first started seeing them, they were those little tiny cubs, and now they're sort of grown up and getting to the stage where they're becoming part of, the pride is 15 fully grown lions. And, it's been quite cool watching them grow up. So yeah. And then the wild dog, they've had a pretty rough time. So we had 2 big packs back in 2016. And then sadly, they all got distemper and died. But now, over the last sort of 5-6 years, they've now built up again into a big pack. So that's been quite fun watching that happen. It started off with 3 sort of got together and then formed a pack, and, 3 survivors sort of got together and shook it off. And, so they all died of distemper. But there were 3 survivors who've now come back and sort of formed this new pack, which is now sort of breeding up in numbers, and they've bred twice now, and hopefully they'll breed again this year. Get the numbers back up to where they were before the distemper came in. But it's been awesome watching them sort of patch themselves back together and become a fully fledged pack again from just the 3 of them.
Yeah, I can imagine. It must be so difficult not to get emotionally invested when you see something like that happening.
Yeah, no, it's always tough to see that happen for sure.
Well, hopefully they'll continue to thrive and come back to full strength.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Archie, has one last question before we wrap up. If there was one thing that you could say to a traveler who's thinking of coming to Suyian, one thing that would really recommend it as a travel destination, what would that be?
I think it's just to take advantage of the fact that you can walk, you can go swimming in the river, you can go biking, you can sleep out under the stars and do all that stuff that you can't do when you go to other places. And it's such a unique experience doing that kind of stuff. It's really worth the effort. Especially spending the nights out, fly camping, being out the vehicle, out the game drive vehicle. It gives a very different perspective to the bush and all of that. So that's what I would suggest for sure.
It really is an amazing set of experiences. It's, as you said before, the freedom of being able to do all of that in the bush is absolutely unprecedented.
No, for sure. Being in the bush and doing game drives is amazing, but being on your own 2 feet and actually being out in the bush like that, it's a great leveler and it's an amazing experience for sure.
Archie, thank you so much. You've painted a really vivid picture of the Suyian Conservancy and what it has to offer. And I'm sure that you will have lots of guests coming your way when we do eventually open up there.
Yeah, no, for sure. We're all extremely excited at Suyian for this new partnership, and I think it's going to be awesome for Suyian. It's going to be awesome for the landscape, and hopefully look forward to a long future doing conservation in this part of the world. It's very exciting.
That it is, and we'll be sure to keep all of our listeners updated as things develop, as everything progresses up to the opening. Thank you again, Archie.
No worries.
Thank you for listening to Leave Our World a Better Place. Don't forget to subscribe to make sure that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to find out more about And Beyond, please log on to our website at andbeyond.com.